Welcome to Breakthrough Weekly. I'm your host, Monica Pelayo. This is where we examine the subconscious patterns shaping your decisions so you can change them. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're returning back, thank you for being back. Today's episode is titled When Rejection is Actually Protection. Let's begin. Now, a moment that once felt like rejection quietly redirected my life towards purpose. Years ago, someone I believed was the love of my life disappeared from my life without explanation. I spent a long time trying to understand what had happened. Like many people do after a painful experience, the mind replayed the events over and over again, searching for answers that never came. Recently, I came across this short interview clip on Instagram by School of Hard Knocks featuring Forbes Riley. During the conversation, she said something that immediately made me pause and reflect on that experience. She said, people hit rock bottom all the time. Most of them stay there. They get comfortable and build a couch and a house down there. Don't do that. Best thing in life you can do is go down and spring right back up. Life happens for you, not to you. Hearing those words immediately took me back to a time when I had done exactly that. I remember the days I spent lying on my couch, deeply depressed, replaying everything that had happened. Years later, during my training in rapid transformational therapy, I heard a similar idea repeated many times in the client sessions I studied. Marissa Peer often reminds clients that the life happens for you, not to you. And when people struggle with wounds created by difficult parents, she explains something equally powerful. We come through our parents, not from them. Hearing Forbes Riley say those words immediately brought those lessons back to mind. When we go through painful moments, the mind often gets stuck in a loop, reliving the betrayal and the hurt, while trying to make sense of what happened. That interview reminded me of one of the most difficult experiences of my life, a moment that years later I realized had quietly redirected the course of my life. Years ago, long before I became a certified in hypnosis, I reconnected with someone I had known since childhood. I first met him when I was about 11 or 12 years old, and later saw him again in my teenage years. Like many teenage moments, I had a quiet crush on him, but nothing ever came from it, and life moved on. Our paths eventually went in completely different directions, and many years passed before we reconnected again as adults. What began as a reconnection eventually turned into a relationship. And over time, we began talking seriously about the possibility of me relocating closer to where he lived. At first, I asked him to wait because there were several important factors I had to consider. My daughter's life was established where we were living, and my career was progressing. Around that same time, I received a promotion, which ironically made the decision even more complicated. Relocating would likely mean walking away from the role I had worked so hard to achieve. For a while, I continued asking for time while I tried to figure out a path that would work for both my daughter and my career. Eventually, once I felt there might be a solution and my daughter was open to the idea of relocating, I told him yes. That's when I began exploring options within the company and reaching out to offices closest to where he lived to see whether a transfer might be possible. I began seriously considering what that move might look like. I took a 2-month sabbatical from work. Part of that time off was intentionally planned so my daughter and I could spend time in different areas near where he lived, allowing us to become familiar with the region and decide where we would relocate. The first stop on that trip was Illinois, where we met for a family reunion with his relatives. One of his former partners was also present because she had remained close with his sister and was considered part of the extended family circle. During that reunion, I began noticing that something felt different in the way he interacted with me. The person I had been dating for months suddenly seemed distant and cold. At the time, I assumed it might simply be the environment. We were surrounded by family and had very little time alone. Later that evening, after my daughter and I had already left the gathering to return to the hotel, a situation unfolded that created tension among the family members and left the atmosphere strained for the remainder of the visit. After the reunion, we traveled with him back to the state where he lived. The plan had been for my daughter and me to spend a week there so we could spend time together and continue getting familiar with the area. However, because the tension from the reunion carried over, the situation remained unsettled. Instead of staying together as originally planned, he arranged for my daughter and me to stay with another family member. As a result, the time we were supposed to spend together became very limited, and we only saw each other briefly here and there. The distance I had noticed earlier began to feel even more pronounced. After the week, my daughter and I continued the rest of our trip, traveling to visit friends and family in several places, including Florida, South Carolina, and Ohio. During that time, he was still communicating with me, although the conversation gradually became more limited. While I was in Ohio visiting family, I reached out to him and suggested that we meet again later during my trip so we could finally spend some time together privately. He mentioned that he would be traveling to Chicago, and I told him that I could meet him there at the end of my travels so we could reconnect away from the family environment. But after that, the communication stopped. My messages went unanswered. Around that same time, my daughter decided to return home earlier than planned because there was something she wanted to attend. Since she was heading back sooner than expected, that gave me the flexibility to travel to Chicago, so I went. A part of me still hoped that he would respond and that he would finally have the conversation I've been trying to have. I spent a couple days in Chicago's waiting to hear from him, exploring the city and trying to make the best of the situation. But he never responded. He ghosted me. There was no explanation, no conversation, no closure, just silence. When I returned home, I received some difficult news about something that had happened to my daughter while I was away. That added another layer of emotion I wasn't prepared for. Part of the depression that followed wasn't just processing the ghosting and the unanswered questions, it was also the overwhelming guilt of feeling like I should have been there to protect my daughter. A part of me felt like I had failed her as a mother, and I struggled with the painful thought that, in trying to work things out with them, I had chosen him over her. There was also anger, because I kept thinking that if I had been home, I might have been able to protect her from what happened. When I returned home, it felt like the world completely shut down. I was still on my sabbatical, which meant I wasn't working and suddenly had far too much time on my hands. The first month of my sabbatical had been spent traveling. The second month had nothing planned. Normally, I'm the type of person who keeps myself busy. I fill my schedule with activities, projects, and things to do. But during that time, I had nothing to distract me. The silence gave my mind too much space to replay everything that had just happened: the ghosting, the guilt about my daughter, the confusion, and unanswered questions. There were many days when I spent most of my time on the couch, sleeping or crying, not wanting to do anything. Looking back now, I recognize that as my rock bottom moment. I felt defeated. I questioned my worth. I struggled to understand how someone I loved so deeply could disappear without a conversation. I remember my roommate at the time asking me why I was always sleeping on the couch. At that time, I didn't fully realize it, but that was one of the ways my mind was trying to numb the pain. Sometimes when we are hurting, the mind tries to numb the pain. We sleep more, withdraw, or turn to distractions or habits that help us avoid what we're feeling. At other times, the mind may replay the experience not to numb it, but as a way to trying to understand it or protect us from being hurt again. The truth is, it's okay to feel the sadness and allow ourselves space to process what happened. But if we stay trapped in overanalyzing the situation, it can become its own form of torment. The goal is to acknowledge what happened, feel the emotions, and take the lessons from the experience, and eventually allow ourselves to move forward. At the time, I didn't yet know what direction my life was supposed to take. I only knew that the experience had shaken me deeply, and I was trying to make sense of the pain and the confusion I was feeling. When the relationship ended the way it did, the silence was incredibly difficult to process. Not knowing why he had suddenly stopped communicating left me questioning my own worth. When someone you love disappears without explanation, the mind searches for answers, and in that search, it is easy to begin turning the questions inward. I replayed moments in my head, wondering what I had done wrong or what I might have missed. That uncertainty was one of the hardest parts of the experience. About a year after he ghosted me, the company I was working for began going through a major restructuring, reducing the number of smaller satellite offices across the country. One of the offices impacted was the location where he lived, and suddenly that office was being eliminated. When I heard the news, my first reaction was shocked. The office in the very place I had once planned to relocate to was disappearing. Almost immediately, another realization followed. If the relationship had continued, I had moved there as we had planned, I could have found myself without a job, far away from the career path I was continuing to fold where I was. In that moment, what once felt like rejection began to look very different. It started to feel more like protection. Instead of seeing the relationship ending as something that had fallen apart, I recognized that it had prevented me from relocating to a place where my career could have suddenly disappeared. I changed the meaning I had attached to that painful moment, and with that shift, the emotional weight of the experience began to release. Through my training and work in hypnosis, I later came to understand exactly why that shift mattered. The subconscious mind attaches meaning to emotional significant experience, and those interpretations shape how we carry those moments forward in our lives. When the meaning changes, the emotional response changes. That shift in interpretation allowed me to move forward without carrying the same pain. Life continued unfolding in ways I could have not predicted. Instead of relocating across the country as I had once considered, my career continued to grow where I was. Eventually, I relocated to Santa Clara, which opened new professional opportunities and allowed my path within the company to continue expanding. Around that time, about 2 years after he ghosted me, and not long after I had relocated to Santa Clara, I learned that he had married a previous partner and had begun building a family with her. For a brief moment, the news stirred emotion because it reminded me of a conversation we once had years earlier when visiting our hometown in Mexico. Sitting in the plaza in front of the Catholic Church, he had once told me that if he ever were to marry through the church, it would only be with me. For a moment, hearing the news triggered the old emotional memory connected to that belief. But almost immediately, I shifted the meaning I gave to the situation. By that point, I had already seen the character he had revealed through his actions. Marriage, especially within the Catholic Church, is a sacred sacrament, and there was no part of me that would have wanted to enter something so meaningful with someone who had handled the relationship the way he did. That moment became another example of something I now see often in my work. When an event activates an old belief, the emotional response can feel immediate and powerful. But when the meaning of the situation changes, the emotional charge changes with it. A few years later, my career continued evolving and eventually led me to work in the CEO's office. That experience expanded my perspective in ways I could have never anticipated. What once felt like one of the most painful chapters of my life had quietly redirected my life. Over time, that experience became the part of the journey that eventually led me to work what I do today, helping people understand how beliefs formed during emotional significant moments can influence the way they interpret experiences later in life. At the time, I questioned my worth, and I replayed the events over and over in my mind. There were many days when simply getting up felt difficult. With time, a deeper realization began to emerge. I came to understand two important truths. The first one was that the person I once believed was the love of my life was not the right partner for me. The second was something far more meaningful. The depth of love I had felt did not come from him, it came from me. For years, I had built walls around my heart out of fear of being hurt. That experience showed me something I had never fully recognized before. My capacity to love deeply had always existed within me. Through my training and work, I now do this with clients. I learned something important. The event itself is often not what hurts us the most. What hurts is the meaning we attach to the event. And the meaning is the rarely formed in isolation. It is filtered through beliefs we develop much earlier in life, often during childhood. Those early beliefs quietly become the lens through which we interpret experiences involving rejection, love, trust, or belonging. Once I understood that, I was able to look at that experience differently and realize that the intensity of the pain was connected to the deeper beliefs that had existed long before that relationship. While I was training to become a hypnotherapist and continuing my personal development journey, I traveled to Dubai to attend a Mind Valley conference. During that trip, another realization became clear to me. For a long time, I believed that the depth of love I felt for that person might only happen once in a lifetime. But reflecting on my journey, I understood something different. If I had been capable of loving someone that deeply once, then that capacity did not come from him. It already existed within me, just as I have love for my daughter, my grandchildren, and others in my life. Our ability to love is not limited to a simple relationship. Love is something we carry within ourselves. Realizing that allowed me to release the fear of love again. While writing this article, another connection became clear to me. For most of my life, I carried a quiet belief that I was somehow unlovable. Growing up, my relationship with my father left me with deep trust issues, and that early experience shaped how I interpreted relationships later in life. This is exactly what happened in my case. The pain I felt when he ghosted me wasn't only about the relationship ending, it activated a much older belief that had been living underneath the surface for years. Deep down, a part of me had concluded long ago that I wasn't lovable enough. When he disappeared without explanation, my mind interpreted that moment as confirmation of that belief. Because of it, I spent years protecting my heart, building walls and convincing myself that loving too deeply was dangerous. Over time, I came to understand something important. Growth is not only about getting back up after difficult experience. It is also about healing the wounds that caused us to fall in the first place, so that these patterns stop repeating. What once felt like rejection eventually revealed itself as protection. If that relationship had continued and I had relocated the way we had planned, my life would have taken a completely different direction. My career would have not evolved the way that it did. I might have never done that personal healing that allowed me to break generational patterns, and I would have not been doing the work I do today as a hypnotherapist. The person I have become would have never chose that path. What once felt like one of the most painful moments in my life quietly redirected me toward the life and work I was meant to live. And experiences like this are often easier to understand only after the time and perspective reveal that they were trying to redirect us toward. Take a moment to think about an experience in your own life that once felt deeply painful or confusing. At the time, you may have questioned why it happened or replayed the moment over and over in your mind, searching for answers. Many of us do this when we are hurt. Our mind tries to make sense of the experience, hoping that if we analyze it long enough, we might find closure. With the benefits of the time and perspective, some of those moments begin to look different. Experiences that once felt like rejection, loss, or failure sometimes reveal themselves as turning points that quietly redirected our lives in ways we could have not seen at the time. What is one experience in your life that once felt like a painful ending, but with time and clarity turned out to be a redirection that ultimately led you to something better? What did that experience teach you about yourself? If you're currently going through a difficult moment, it may be hard to see any purpose in it right now. When we're in the middle of pain, our mind often focuses on the hurt, the confusion, and the unanswered questions. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is give ourselves time, allow space for healing, and remain open to the possibility that the meaning we assign to the experience today may not be the meaning we see in the future. One of the most common things I see in my work is how people remain emotionally tied to moments from their past. The mind keeps replaying the event, searching for answers, trying to understand why something happened the way it did. That mental loop can quietly shape how we see ourselves, how we approach relationships, and how we make decisions moving forward. Often the pattern isn't about the event itself anymore, it's about the belief that formed during that experience. When those beliefs remain in the subconscious, they can continue influencing behavior long after the moment has passed. This is the kind of work I help people explore through hypnosis, where we identify the beliefs formed during the emotionally significant experiences and update the patterns they continue to influence today. The goal isn't to erase the past, but to understand the meaning we gave to those moments and update the beliefs that may still be holding us back. Identifying the belief formed in that moment can change the pattern. If you recognize yourself in this pattern and feel curious about what might be underneath it, you can schedule a complimentary exploratory call to see whether this type of work might be a good fit for you. Schedule a call at thethrivingpathways.com/appointment. If something in this episode brought awareness to a pattern you hadn't fully seen before, take a moment to reflect on it. Awareness is where meaningful changes begin. The more we understand the subconscious beliefs shaping our reactions, the more power we have to respond differently and create new outcomes. Thank you for spending this time with me and for being part of these conversations about awareness, growth, and transformation. If this episode helped you see something more clearly, share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss next week's Breakthrough Weekly. I'm Monica Pelayo. I'll see you next time.